I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Good evening. Tom Joscelyn with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal is here to report on Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda today and Al-Qaeda over these last years since the bin Laden raid. We begin with Al-Qaeda today. There is a report that a significant manager, deputy general manager for Al-Qaeda, was killed in a U.S. drone strike. Tom, a very good evening to you. This is AQAP. Does this in some fashion connect to the Yemen civil war now underway, or was this a strike that followed through after years of pursuit of AQAP? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Well, my assumption is that it's related to both. That both the U.S. intelligence community has been tracking AQAP leaders very carefully for years, and in addition, this is related to the recent gains made by AQAP because the reports that we have suggest that the deputy general manager of Al-Qaeda that you referenced was actually killed in Mukalla, which is a town in southern Yemen, which was recently overrun by AQAP's forces. So it's quite possible that what's happened is that basically the intel has had a little bit of an uptick because of their advances that AQAP has made in different areas, where maybe they're now picking up on the locations of some various leaders there in those different areas.
Who is he? What was his role before his death?
Well, you remember there's this whole idea that there's this core of Al-Qaeda in South Asia, and that basically all these different regional branches of Al-Qaeda and affiliated groups are not really the core of Al-Qaeda. There's something different or something less than that. And that's not true, and a guy like this proves it's not true. His name is known as Nasser bin al-Ansi. And in fact, we pinpointed him in the bin Laden files. These are files that were recovered in Osama bin Laden's compound. We identified him by another nom de guerre alias he was using as someone who was being groomed by bin Laden's top lieutenants all the way back in 2010 to assume a top leadership position within Al-Qaeda. So this is a guy who was groomed by the senior-most Al-Qaeda leaders to become a management figure within the organization. So when he relocates to Yemen in 2011, he does so not as somebody who's just loosely affiliated with Al-Qaeda, but in fact as a fully made Al-Qaeda operative, one of their senior guys. What happens over time is that the head of AQAP, Nasser alWahishi, so this is the head of their regional branch in the Arabian Peninsula, also becomes the general manager or chief operating officer for Al-Qaeda. And the general manager position is another position that's detailed extensively in the bin Laden files that have been released to the public. And Nasser bin al-Ansi basically served as a deputy general manager, somebody to him. So they had responsibilities globally across Al-Qaeda's network, not just within the Arabian Peninsula.
This strike, is it significant? Is this a blow to Al-Qaeda, or is it whack-a-mole these days?
Well, overall, in the long run, it's probably whack-a-mole, but these strikes are significant because what's happened since January 1st of this year is that the U.S. has taken out basically the three top AQAP spokesmen / ideologues. These are guys who have their words carry a significant amount of weight in the jihadist world. They've been very important, for example, in trying to counter the influence of the Islamic State, which is now Al-Qaeda's rival, and trying to argue that people should remain loyal to Al-Qaeda. There's people who have provided justifications for Al-Qaeda's acts of terrorism. In this case, Nasser bin al-Ansi is actually the guy who was called upon to, in fact, go forward and actually justify the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January and claim responsibility for them on behalf of Al-Qaeda. These are guys who were reporting to the senior-most Al-Qaeda leadership. So these are important strikes.
The Al-Qaeda documents you reference, this is documents from the bin Laden raid in 2011, and there's a new article gaining much attention, lots of debate, a lot of controversy by Cy Hirsch in the London Review of Books. I want to focus on the part where it makes light of the idea that there was a treasure trove grabbed by the raiders that night. It, in fact, dismisses that as an exaggeration and says they put a couple of books in a bag. What can you tell us about the documents, what we know about them?
Well, here's what's funny is that even Al-Qaeda says that the limited documents that have been released to the U.S. public are legitimate, are genuine, and that, in fact, they're just a small sampling of what was captured. So even Al-Qaeda has come out and said that the documents, there was, in fact, a treasure trove and that the U.S. government has only released a small fraction of them. So this runs contrary to this anonymous official, retired official that Hirsch is talking to, poo-poos the whole idea, basically says that there wasn't this massive treasure trove of stuff captured. I'll just say this. as I was reading through the story has just numerous flaws. It's not credible reporting. I don't consider it even journalism, to be honest with you. I just consider it to be sort of the work of a sub-tier mind at this point. But when you looked at that point about about the Bin Laden documents, this struck a chord with me about how bad the reporting is, because this is something we've led the way at as a Long War Journal in advocating for declassification and for more of these documents to be released to the American public, because we've accumulated dozens of sources, about the contents of the files and how many there are and all these sorts of things. And we've been reporting on this for years. And in fact, my colleague Bill Roggio, who unfortunately can't join us tonight, he, in August of 2010, think about this, John, this is amazing. In August 2010, I think it was August 15th, if I recall, 2010, he reports, based on our sources, that bin Laden had told Shabab in Somalia, which is now an official branch of Al-Qaeda, that they should keep their ties to Al-Qaeda secret, that they don't want to announce that, in fact, Shabab is part of Al-Qaeda at this point, because it will create all sorts of problems for Shabab. Well, lo and behold, after the bin Laden raid and sometime later, 2 files have now been declassified from bin Laden's compound, and those files show that on August 7th, 2010, just over a week before Bill reported that, bin Laden actually wrote a letter to the head of Shabab in Somalia and to one of his top deputies, carrying forward those exact same instructions, saying that you have to keep the relationship secret. So this is sort of how dialed in we've been on this issue, that basically even all the way back in 2010, Bill was reporting on what bin Laden was saying behind the scenes before it was even made public or before he was even killed. And then we see the files come to light in the public, and in fact, they validate that reporting. So, Hersh's stuff is, I would say this is someone who has not investigated the issue very closely. His retired official clearly has no knowledge of the subject matter whatsoever, and this makes his reporting really worthless in my view.
The bin Laden documents, where are they to our knowledge today, the ones that haven't been examined or haven't been released to the public?
The CIA maintains what's known as executive authority inside the U.S. intelligence community over them, over the entire cache. And just so listeners understand the volume of what we're talking about here, upwards of approximately 1.5 million documents and files were recovered in the raid on bin Laden's compound. And this is the complete opposite of the story that Hersh is saying. Hersh is basically telling a story from this retired official who, of course, doesn't know anything, that there was basically nothing. There was just a few bags of books and files and that sort of thing. Absolutely false. Just not true at all. Bin
Laden, was he participating and giving orders and part of the design of a new wave of Al-Qaeda attacks at the time of his death? Do we know?
Yeah, he certainly was. In fact, you can even see, we have roughly 24 files have been declassified from that cache from bin Laden's lair. And the story, even in that small subset of 24 files, shows quite clearly that in the year leading up to his death, bin Laden was very much an active manager of the global international network. He's coordinating activities. He's answering questions from Al-Qaeda's different regional branches. He's making management decisions on personnel and the like. He's maintaining the chain of command to him and only him when it comes to external operations, which are their attacks in the West. There's just a volume of information in that small set of files that we have that shows that, in fact, he was still very active. So the idea that he was out of the game is false as well.
Have you ever seen it mentioned, Tom, that there's this odd coincidence that his death in May is the same year that the Arab Spring begins and sweeps through North Africa and then into the Middle East? Is there any connection between what he was planning and the rising of the Islamists across so many Arab dictatorships?
Well, great question, John, because one of the things we've learned is that the CIA and the Obama administration woefully misjudged the role of Islamists, and in particular Al-Qaeda, in the Arab Spring. They believe that the Arab Spring sounded the death knell for Al-Qaeda's ideology because it showed that political change and transformation could be accomplished without waging violent jihad, and they thought that this was sort of the end of Al-Qaeda's ideology. The truth was exactly the opposite. In fact, Al-Qaeda exploited all the security vacuums left in the wake of these dictators who were deposed to essentially promulgate their ideas and build up new branches and new organizations. And in fact, in the documents that we have from bin Laden's compound, just in the last month of his life, in April 2011, in fact, I'm holding one of these files right here in my hands, bin Laden says quite clearly to one of his lieutenants that this is an unprecedented opportunity for us to take advantage of the Arab Spring, what we call the Arab Spring, what they call the uprisings or revolutions. And then, in fact, this allowed them to send operatives from South Asia around the globe to sort of inculcate their ideas, their ideology, and also their organization in different areas, including Libya, including Tunisia, Syria, and elsewhere.
Tom Joscelyn, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy's Long War Journal. I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show.